Did you watch the Coronation on Saturday? I'm sure a lot of you did, if not out of respect, then at least curiosity. I can guess what you saw. Long lines of people cheering for the king, a flypast over London, cavalry regiments marching in unison, and of course, the ceremony itself. But here's what you did not see. Take a look.
Not my king! Not my king! Not my king! Not my king!
Not my king!
Not my king!
Not my king!
Not my king!
Not my king!
Not my king!
Not my king!
Not my king! Not my king! Not my king! Not my king! Not my king! Not my king!
Not my king!
Not my king!
Not my king!
Not my king!
We attempt to actually clamp down on what are our rights to actually protest.
We don't need to be wasting money.
We're paying for it, the taxpayers.
Highest public office in the land should be elected by the people, not inherited.
Dozens of anti-monarchy protesters arrested and taken away. Around 64 of them were rounded up. Their crime? Protesting against the monarchy. Among those arrested was a man called Graham Smith. He heads an anti-monarchy group called Republic. It's the same group behind the Not My King campaign. They'd planned a massive demonstration on Saturday, but the cops had other plans. They arrested dozens of people and dispersed the others. On what charges, though? More than half of them were accused of conspiring to cause a public nuisance. Just let that sink in. Britain is calling protests a public nuisance. Most onlookers criticized the heavy-handedness of the police. They said that the protests were peaceful.
I thought it was outrageous. Our people, the head of Republic, Graham Smith, has had long discussions with the police about what we were going to do, how it was going to be done, what area we would have for protesting and so on. And yet, at sometime just after 7 o'clock this morning, when they arrived at the square, they were arrested.
It's been more than 48 hours since the arrests. Most of these protesters have been released. Graham Smith himself spent 16 hours in custody. Now he wants answers. He says the police were informed in advance of the plans. What the protesters plan to do, where they plan to do it, and how many people would be present. Listen in.
I think that they were hoping to stop us from staging a large peaceful protest on the edge of the Coronation. I think that that was a spectacularly poor decision for all sorts of reasons, not least because there was no grounds for arresting us. And it is an affront to democracy, an attack on our rights. But also it's backfired in the sense that, this has become a major news story over the Coronation weekend.
So what excuse do the cops have? The protesters say it was premeditated. The UK government did not want the BBC's beauty shots to feature protesters. They wanted Union Jacks on the screen, not anti-monarchy banners. What's more, the government is still defending it. The Culture Secretary says the police had to, quote-unquote, make tough choices. Let me tell you what those tough choices were. The cops in London arrested people who were handing out rape alarms. These are safety devices. They make a loud sound when activated. The police say these devices would have been used to disrupt the coronation. So what did they do? They arrested the women's safety volunteers. Talk about great optics. So just to recap, activists in London were protesting against an unelected head of state. The cops ended up arresting them. Even women's safety volunteers were rounded up. Can you imagine if this happened anywhere else? American tanks would be hitting the streets, British ones would be following right behind. But since the king was involved, no such outrage. Not even a word of condemnation from Western capitals. And why just governments? Look at how Western media is covering it. Every BBC report talks about arrests and reactions, but guess which word is missing? Crackdown. How else do you describe what's happened? It was a needless crackdown on peaceful protests, but the BBC would much rather call it an arrest, which is convenient. Saturday's crackdown exposes British double standards, the same ones we talked about last week. When protests happened elsewhere, it's a democratic right. When they happen at home, it's a disruption. But no amount of editorial tweaks can justify British hypocrisy, and no amount of pomp and ceremony can hide these pictures.